Okay. So thanks very much to the organisers for inviting us. I've really enjoyed this conference so far, and it's been a really nice opportunity to go back to some of my YouTube research, but also to think about how I'm teaching research methods for studying YouTube. So I thought I'd talk a little bit about the latter, about actually teaching research methods. So most of my YouTube research is from 2009 until 2011, and it's really concentrated in this project that I was at the time a researcher on, working with Lisa Consona and Sabina Michal, for a project that's called Fitna the Video Battle, how YouTube enables the young to perform their religious and public identities. So this is about a anti-Islam film that was leaked onto the internet by right-wing politician Geert Wilders. And what we were interested in is to examine YouTube as a kind of battleground for responses. Because the mainstream media discussion around this video is very much about should the video be banned or not, but it wasn't really about religion, and there were, unsurprisingly perhaps, a very limited number of voices that were deemed appropriate or interesting enough to comment on this. And we saw YouTube as a really interesting site at the time where multiple different voices, including Muslims, young people, were uploading responses. And so we ended up examining 1,413 videos. So what I particularly took away from this project is the power of combining different methods and approaches to try and understand a complex phenomenon. And so we ended up publishing 4 journal articles, and there's some other articles and chapters that have come out of it, but we tried to address different aspects of this data set. So we did a content analysis of the Fitna video itself, looking at how different people are displayed in the video, but we also looked at a subset of these 1,400 videos, 65 videos that were uploaded by women, and as Mike has already highlighted, at the time, you were able to make this selection based on gender, and now the APIs have removed this. We also did a network analysis to try and understand who is commenting or what groups of people are kind of organized together, and what does that mean, and what kind of ties can you observe from that, but also what kind of ties does the tool suggest are here, and what kind of critical analysis might you need to kind of bring to that in terms of temporality, or what you think this kind of connection between 2 different dots actually means if you apply maybe qualitative methods to think about, friends, for example, or subscriptions. We also did a genre analysis to try and understand what kinds of videos people were uploading. Were they extensive videos that people had made themselves, or were they short sorry videos, for example, or were they predominantly text videos with voiceovers where people were responding. So we had different genres that we looked at. Vlogging, of course, was another one. And we also did a survey of the posters. So we managed to get 40 responses. This took us a really long time to get, and they were mainly from men. But we also wanted to understand, why did people feel the need to upload response videos? So we had a quite an extensive approach to all aspects of this response, and I think was a very nice way of looking at this. So one of the other big takeaways from this project was working with Mike, who wasn't an official member of the team, but when I started on this project, there wasn't a tool that would allow you to download YouTube data. And so I put in a kind of a cry for help to Mike, and he very kindly responded by building a new add-on to Webmatic Analyst, which actually allowed me to do this work. So Webmatic Analyst for YouTube is a direct result of me basically saying, why isn't there a tool that can do this? Because trying to do this manually is really difficult for all sorts of different reasons. You just can't hand code fast enough with the API restrictions, and the way in which the videos are displayed, even on an hourly basis, kept changing, and it was making me crazy. So Mike ended up building this tool. And so beyond the FitNet project, Mike and I have done some further work, and he's already discussed the paper looking at comments, because one of the things that I was really interested in is the way in which the field of research around YouTube was shaping at the time, and this kind of perception that YouTube was this really negative space, but that was largely driven by research on essentially very negative issues. I mean, for us it was no surprise that a lot of the conversations around Islam were negative, and therefore one of the things that Mike and I wanted to also look at is what does a kind of a general comment look like on average if you also include how-to videos and so on. And I think that's really important to try and understand what is average versus what is the perception of a social space. So what I really want to kind of talk about now is how I've taken that research into my teaching. And so I've been doing research on social media for over a decade now, and since 2011 I've run a really popular module called Researching Social Media, which is a 12-week postgraduate module, which has really grown since I first started it in academic year 2011. And so you can see how over that period, and especially last year, all of a sudden there's just this huge jump from over 50 students to 150, which I sort of had to lie down for some weeks to recover from that intake. And the prediction is that it's going to be 180 this year. So something is clearly happening that many more students are interested in understanding how do you deal with data from social media platforms. So just as a tiny bit of background, most of these students come from our data science program. I'm based in the information school, so most of the students come from one of the information school programs, and it's also being offered to the journalism school. So it's a really nice mix of students, and this year it will also be offered to sociology. So it's a really broad mix of students who take this module. And with that in mind, I try and kind of cover a whole range of different methods for these students. So this ranges from content analysis, both textual and visual analysis is really crucial to my work. I also direct a research lab that Mike is also part of the visual social media lab. So for us, trying to understand online visual cultures is really important. And so students are exposed to content analysis and discourse analysis, both focused on text but also images. They do some mini exploratory digital ethnography fieldwork with one of my RAs, Anne Burns. Of course, social network analysis, sentiment analysis, we use SentiStrength, actor type analysis, link analysis. Again, Mike's tools are really useful. More broadly, digital methods, trying to think about medium specificity, so this is really coming out of the work of Richard Rogers and others. And also increasingly looking at memes, we use semiotics and iconography. So it's a whole bunch of different methods. So one of the key things in terms of teaching this module and then kind of moving towards talking about YouTube is to teach these students to think critically about the data they work with. And that sounds easy, it isn't. And I've experimented over the years with lots of different ways in which to train them to think critically about this data, specifically how the data is made. So to really get them out of this idea that data naturally occurs on these platforms, but to think about, and yesterday Jean's talk already set us up really nicely for thinking about these issues. But how can we think about the creation of data, the flow of data between platforms, users, APIs, the tools that are built on top of APIs, the algorithms that run these platforms, so that students have a much more complex idea about where this data is coming from and therefore what they can do with it. I also get them to really think about what is the data that they want or need, right? So one of the things with social media data is that something that can creep in is that students can't think beyond the data that is simply available through the API. And so what I really want them to think about is forget about what's available through the API, forget about the tool. First of all, actually think about what is the data that you need to answer your research question. If you cannot answer that, there's no point in a way to just start looking at a tool and start kind of churning out results, unless you're doing it in a very exploratory way, and unless you're doing that to have other goals. But if you're trying to answer a specific research question through data, then you really need to, first of all, think about what it is that you need in order to answer that question. Then the second layer of that is in terms of data collection, what is actually possible, right? So once you've tried to answer the question, what is the data that you need, the next immediate question is that data available? Is it possible to collect that data? And often the answer is no. The next question, so we kind of go through this kind of decision tree process, is are there any tools that can help you? And often, again, the answer is no. Right, so this is kind of depressing stuff. But what the kind of the core function of this thinking is to really move them away from tool-driven approaches. And to really get them to think beyond what is simply available through APIs and tools. So one of the things that I've observed over the kind of the last 5 years of teaching this is that students tend to be much more keen to learn tools than they are to learn methods, right? So what they want is kind of quick fixes that they perceive tools to offer. What they're not interested in, per se, is the kind of much more boring, hardcore kind of social science methods. And then to try and think about what is possible between these. So they have a lot of assumptions about what the tools can do and how the tools can help them, and assumptions about what analysis the tool will do automatically for them. And so what creeps in very early on is this kind of deep disappointment at the realization that there's enormous limitations to these tools, and that a lot of the analysis has to be done by hand, or has to be done in different ways, or has to be done in an approach that means that there isn't one tool that's going to do everything. Collect your data, analyze your data, and visualize your data. So what we try and work through is to really think critically about what it is that you need, what is the tool that you need, what you need it for, what can be done in the tool, and what may have to be done manually. Right, so it's this kind of trying to, first of all, map out your research design in this really critical way. And they struggle with it, and they tend to not like this bit. So the reason for this, and this is again based on many years of teaching this stuff, is that if you start with teaching students tools, they cannot see beyond the tool. They really struggle to see beyond the tool, because the tool often is very beguiling in terms of the visualizations that it may produce or what the tool can do, and it's very difficult to break them out of that tool kind of siloed thinking and to snap them out of maybe you need different tools, or maybe you need to do part of your analysis manually. And it also becomes really hard to identify limitations, because if you're really kind of only looking at one particular tool, it's very hard to imagine the wider landscape, the wider data landscape. And so what the teaching approach has kind of developed into over the years is to try and get them to this critical level so that they can think beyond the tool. And one of the things that I've been experimenting with in the last couple of years is to try and get them, first of all, to think about themselves as social media users before we move them into thinking about social media, thinking about themselves as social media researchers. So one of the ways in which I've done that in the last couple of years is to start them off on the web interface of the platform. So to look at the contemporary web interface, and then very much echoing Jean's approach, to also look at the history of the interface, and to start to think about different key moments in the development of the platform that may or may not be important, and that may or may not give indications that the platform may change during the time that they're studying it. And this is also something that students often don't think about, and we've heard already examples yesterday where the API changes and all of a sudden your data collection halfway through your project is affected in different ways. We also examine the API documentation if that's available for the platform. And we also look at how a chosen tool works with the API. Because of course there isn't a seamless duplication of what is possible in the API in terms of what is then possible in the tool. And again, for them to understand what is available in the API and what is available in the tool, and why have tool developers made certain choices about what to collect from the API or not, is another layer of getting them to think about that, as well as to think about how sustainable a tool or an API might be. So tools break, and they can break for reasons of APIs being changed, but they can also break for reasons of cease and desist letters by Twitter. And there's many, many examples of this. Keeper is one of the most well-known ones. But tools also, companies get sued and tools die. And this is, again, something that they really need to understand. So one of the other things that we try and work through is, once we get to the tool, is the tool performing in such a way that you were expecting, right? So is the tool doing what you hoped it would do? Is it fit for purpose? So one of the things that we did early on with them is they wrote tool reviews, and then they gave presentations, and they interviewed each other about what these tools do, and they make recommendations. So that was a really fun part, which unfortunately I had to scrap because there's too many students now. So, analyzing comments. So Mike's already talked through this in a really useful way, so I don't have to go through it in too much detail, but one of the things that I do with them is I go through the architecture of the comments for a number of different platforms, because I want them to start to understand that these architectures are different, that the affordances that are available in the comment sections are different for different platforms, that sometimes comments are nested, that sometimes you are able to respond to comments, and that sometimes the platform calls something, what you would call a comment, a tweet, right? So on Twitter, you don't have comments, except that when you look at the interface of Twitter, you can see underneath a tweet responses. And that's not what the API calls it, but maybe in your interpretation, you might say, but those are responses to a tweet, but that's not how the API treats them. So on Twitter is a really horrendous platform for this, because the comments are all called the same. An original post and a comment, they're both called a tweet. So then what we look at is, what does all this data look like in the API? So Mike has already highlighted the drop in numbers of comments that you are able to get out of the API now. So when I started doing this research, you could get 1,000 comments. You could get the 1,000 most recent comments, and over time it has dropped. And so my understanding was that now it was around 150, and Mike's slides highlight is actually 100. So the number of comments you can actually get